can you all see my screen in slideshow mode, or did it?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, well, as always, thank you all for attending. We know that everybody's schedule is busy, and for you to take time out for us, we so appreciate it. So since the last time we've met, this happened. There has been, as all of you know, a shift to looking at, in particular, open source security, and there has been an astonishing increase in what we now like to call supply chain hacks. And at the same time, these supply chain hacks are increasing. Organizations are trying to modernize to more complex cloud native architecture. So they've got pressures coming from them from both sides. So then this happened. It was so astonishing. Log4j was so astonishing to everybody. The Biden administration moved to say, hey, you know what? If you're going to do business with the US government, you're going to have to give us an SBOM. So then SBOMs became a conversation, finally. And if you think about what we have been doing since we started this project, is we have, in the beginning, we started collecting deployment metadata about everything that's deployed, any kind of object, whether it be a microservice or a database object. We collected where it was being deployed to. We collected its configurations for the deployment. We collected where the Helm chart was. So we were collecting metadata about these pieces and parts, primarily to start managing the drift of microservices and the inventory of microservices across hundreds of clusters. So we had that structure in place. So over the course of the last year, we have started adding security information, in particular, data like SBOMs and tracking CVEs for the objects that we are already tracking in the inventory across the clusters. So we have started growing the Ortelius store, what I like to call an evidence store, beyond just DevOps intelligence, but now also supply chain intelligence. We started down this path knowing that people would be calling us and saying, how do you generate an application level SBOM in a microservices environment? We had already been doing much of that, so it was pretty easy for us to aggregate data from the microservices level up into our federated database and produce those kinds of reports. So we have now a way for Ortelius to make it really easy for folks to say, where is this particular open source package? Where is it running? What versions of it is running? And where do I need to fix it? Instead of days to get this data, literally now it's just one big, it's a big query against the database. And because we've already had all those details about where objects were being deployed, and now we have the package information stored with that, this query is super, super easy. We did start a governing board. We did talk about that the last time we had a TOC meeting. Brian Dawson, Steve Taylor, Utkarsh Sharma, Sasha Wharton, Anne-Marie Fred, Sergio Canales, and Siddharth Parikh make up our governing board. This is our second year governing board. Most of these folks have served 1 year, and Utkarsh Sharma is new to this particular year. We've seen some good growth. We have had we have about 250 Google Group members that some of them are active, some of them watch what we're doing, and some of them look for easy pull requests, basically. We have about 718 followers on LinkedIn. We're at 264 GitHub stars. We have 115 GitHub forks. In October, we participated in Hacktoberfest, had 24 pull requests. And for the year, we did 203 total pull requests in 2022. So since we have had the last TOC meeting, the open source community has seen some really strong growth. There's other stuff happening in the market now too. This is different. There are other, I would call them catalogs hitting the market. Tidelift is getting a lot of attention now. Tidelift basically is storing open source package information, nothing else. Bionic and Vulcan are similar tools in that they are working to aggregate data. And then Apiro is looking really more at the infrastructure and auditing the infrastructure and tracking changes and building what I like to call this object relationship model in order to try to understand how an application is acting. So TideLift is the only one that's kind of outside that realm. They do have a component registration, but they're really focused on OS package inventory. We did receive a grant award from XRP. We are working to build a immutable SBOM ledger. We have had some early success in getting this done. We have a POC and the initial design work kind of done, so it's kind of, you can demonstrate it a bit. There's still quite a bit more work to do. We also set up a contributor sponsor program to reimburse the core blockchain contributors with that 75K. We built some new integrations in order to support the SBOM functionality. We integrated with Cyclone DX and SPDX formats, and we use SIFT, and we have started doing some work with Backstage to pull in some of the objects or the registered components that Backstage is managing into our database. And then we're really, this year is the year to focus on adoption. We have released a command line interface to support any type of CI/CD tooling. So from Jenkins to Circle CI to Kepton. And when you do that, if you want to include the SBOM generation, that command line interface will support that. What we've learned is that not a lot of companies actually do SBOM generation. And even if they do, the SBOM sits in that text file at the build directory and it's not consumed. So that CLI interface will allow folks to not only generate an SBOM, but consume it. And we took out most of the deployment engine. Initially, we had the ability for Ortelius to do deployments, and now we're really just focusing on integrating with other deployment tools. And then we built, we do have a true Kubernetes architecture now. Open source contributors can contribute in any language they want, and they create a microservice for that particular function or service. So we had to build a new Helm chart in order to pull that together for folks. We do require now a Kubernetes environment, but Ortelius now can be downloaded from Artifact Hub using a Helm chart. I am going to lead this one to Steve, but I want to say that, again, this conversation, we really want to kind of deep dive into Emporius, and because we do have an opportunity to do some work with Red Hat. And so, Steve, I'll turn this over to you.
Right. So let me just go over this slide and I'll jump over to some more detail. So Tracy, go back to that slide.
All right, I'm going to mute me so they can't hear you and me.
So one of the first steps with the XRPL is, and then we've been working through this for quite a bit of time, is trying to figure out how we can fit into the XRPL and basically NFTs, which what we'll be using for the storage on that side. So as soon as I go over the slide, I'll go ahead and kind of dive into the details there. We have been having meetings with Red Hat. Basically, Emporius is a project that they have that they want to take the OCI registry spec 1.1 and expand that spec to include any type of object. So the driving factor where this actually came about in the Red Hat world was they had a customer that had a closed system and they needed to do builds and run things. And so basically they needed to go and copy OCI information over from the open side into the closed side. and they found that they were going around and copying all these different dispersed databases, registries like npm, Python, so it was a major effort for them to kind of set up this closed system. So their proposal is to expand OCI to handle any type of package, whether it's going to be for Python, like I said, Node, anything that they wanted to store in there is what they want to do. And along with that, they want to store SBOM data as part of that information. Basically, the schema would allow us to utilize Emporius or this OCI registry as a new database that would replace our existing database. I'll dive in that in a second here. But some of the things that now we have the new architecture kind of laid out, we're getting to the point where actually we'll be able to start really hitting the road with coding. So we're actually going to be going around and looking for new folks and our existing folks and getting them some coding done here. As part of that, we need to pick a front end framework. And I'll go over the reason why here in a second. So go ahead and stop sharing, Tracy, and I'll share my screen. Okay, so of course Zoom goes right in the way. So just to kind of go over where we're at, our current architecture as of today is basically we have a hybrid. The majority of the UI and the RESTful APIs are basically a Java servlet, JSP running on Tomcat and Jetty. Those are actually kind of served up in their own individual Docker container. And then that is basically where we have kind of like a data handler that handles all the RESTful APIs. They're not really true REST APIs because they don't really conform to the REST standards. Like when you do a create, you have to do a post, those type of things. So it's kind of just a carryover from when the original project was written. And that back end piece that's written in, that's running in Tomcat allows us to have access to our Postgres database. So that's one side of the monolith. Another piece of it is where we actually serve up the JavaScript and the jQuery for the front end for people to use the browser to navigate the Ortelius UI. There's no framework in place. Basically, what happens is we use a lot of custom JavaScript and some jQuery to kind of create the front end that we have going on. This does run in its own container as well. So you kind of have a duplication of the Tomcat running, one for the front end side and another one for the back end side. We do bring in additional JavaScript packages like Viz.js and data tables. That allows us to do the dependency graph and some prettier tables in the front end. Along with that, we have our backend microservices. So anything new that we have been writing over the last couple of years have been Python fast API programs, and they are specific RESTful API endpoints. So this is conforming to a more true REST API language set, the CRUD piece. We use SQL Alchemy. Basically, it's a Python library. It allows us to connect up to the Postgres database and do our queries. Right now, we have, I think, 5 or 6 microservices that we've added, and that allows us to, and each one of these runs in their own container. So it makes it easy from the programming perspective. We can give a developer, open source contributor like this microservice to work on, and they can do it totally independent of everybody else. So it makes it really easy on that front as we expand out the functionality to keep things moving along. The database, like I said, is Postgres, and both the monolith and the microservices read and write to the database over JDBC and PyODBC. So the new proposed architecture that we've been kind of working on is to really replace the monolith piece. And we're at a point where we're looking at a couple new frameworks. These are the two. Riot.js is actually what Docker Hub uses for their framework. And it sits on top of material components. So it's Joseph right now over in Ghana that's taking a look at the between these two different frameworks to allow us to, come up with a new UI really quick. As part of that new architecture, we'll need to migrate a set of our RESTful APIs from the monolith over to either Python or Node.js. Right now, I'm not really constraining the language set. If we have somebody that knows Node, and there's some cases where we've run into where additional libraries, especially like on the XRPL side, the Node libraries seem to be evolving faster than the Python ones. So there will be cases where Node will be a preference over Python. And this will allow us to go ahead and create, additional microservices and have everything kind of more of the traditional microservice-based architecture all the way through. Now, and here's a list of all the RESTful APIs that we kind of have that we're going to need. There may be a few that's missing as we go, but for the most part, this is the list that we've kind of come up with. On the back end, this is where it gets interesting because we've been working with the XRPL side of things. And the way that we're implementing that is to use basically NFTs to store our JSON objects. So if you have a component version or SBOM or application version, that JSON would be stored in NFT storage. That storage, we have to do some kind of tricks on it to minimize the amount of storage space that we have. So we actually are going through a process of normalizing the data so we just don't duplicate it all over the place. So for example, if a component has the Apache 2 license and we have another component that is also using the Apache 2 license, we don't want to store the Apache 2 license twice. We'll just point to the common one in the NFT storage. Some of the things that we'll need to do, because IPFS, basically NFTs aren't searchable, we have a solution that will create a searchable cache. And right now we're looking at OrangoDB to act as that cache. And part of that process, we would, when you find something, that we would also go ahead and add that the fully denormalized JSON object back to the cache. The reason why we're really highly looking at the OrangoDB is the document retrieval. You don't have to provide like a predefined schema. It'll basically take any JSON that you want and it'll figure out how to index it. We may need to add some additional indexes and graph connections for higher performance, but right now we've seen that you can just go ahead and add in pretty much any JSON and it'll handle it for us without any additional overhead. So this gives us that capability to utilize the XRPL ledger for transactional history, plus the IPFS NFTs to actually store the data. So this is going to be one way that we can go ahead and do our kind of our database solution on that front. The other way that we've been talking about is the OCI registry. Tracy, they're calling it like a universal object reference. So basically, what we would need to do is treat the OCI registry similar to the NFT storage. We would still want to go ahead and create a searchable cache and be able to have go fetch things, information from the OCI registry and bring it back into as JSON objects into the Orango DB. What that allow us to do is have either or of the database. So we would probably end up with two sets of microservices. So if you need to go get a component version from IPFS, you would go ahead and call that component version microservice. And if the component version is stored over in the OCI registry, we would have that that microservice know how to go out to the OCI registry, bring back the component version information. And then from there, the end result between those two services is the same JSON that would go back to the front end, for example. So that would give us the abstraction layer to allow us to plug and play whether we're going to have IPFS, NFTs, or in the XRPL ledger or the OCI level. So that's kind of the thought that we have. It's going to be extra work to do two sets of services, but at this point, the Red Hat project hasn't even been approved by Red Hat, and the extension that they want to the 1.1 schema for OCI hasn't been adopted by the community, the OCI folks. So I think the OCI is going to be there, but I think it's going to be a lag, probably of a year would be my guess. So in the meantime, I wanted to keep going forward with the XRPL at that front. We may need some stuff, the Postgres database to hang around for a little bit. And the reason being, there's things like users, groups, access control, the domains, those things may need to reside inside of Postgres until we do the full migration at that level. Like I said, in Tracy's slide that she had, this is like the new architecture. I'm still working to build out the object schemas for every single object, so we can actually pull everything together. That's my task for this week as we move along between these two. But the idea is to have these separate microservices provide us the abstraction layer to the backend database, whether it's going to be the OCI registry or the XRPL side of things. So that's kind of where we're at with the new architecture. Tracy, was there any more slides after that? I can't remember.
Let me check. Nope, that was it.
Okay, so yeah, so now let's dive into questions and stuff.
I have so many questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I should have been writing them down as I went, but it ended up having a lot more than I anticipated. So first off, I'm really trying to wrap my head around why we're dealing with blockchain. I think I may have missed a memo somewhere, but I feel like, look, why are we going this direction? What's the value add that we think we're getting here?
Yeah, so the value add is we want to have an immutable history of everything that is created. So if you do build a new microservice, for example, that basically is and it's going to be, we'll just take the simple example. It's in a container, a Docker image. That transaction would be added to the immutable ledger, so we can keep a track of the history of how things happen with that component version. So where was it deployed? If we get a new component version, how we can look at how things change over time. And the same thing would apply to like application versions. As applications evolve over time, we want to have that history, and the ledger is where we found that it would make sense to have that immutable history out there for us to kind of trudge through and be able to record and visualize what's happening over time with folks' applications.
I mean, I totally get transaction history, super critical, right? And I'm looking at this site, it's, but blockchain is not known for being fast, especially as you scale over time. And that's, I think, the biggest concern that I would have, not being an expert at it, but just seeing what people are trying to use it for and thinking about, like, is this going to become this basically massive sandbag? And the other thing is, and this is the concern that I've had, and one of the many reasons why I'm a little bit, I don't want to say I'm anti-blockchain, I'm just highly skeptical blockchain, is just sometimes the immutability, now you have immutability on something that's actually a mistake, right? And so, and unfortunately, a lot of these industries are tied to Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And so as an industry, which I do not at all, I'm not associating Ortelius to that, obviously, but the sort of the volatility of a lot of that development because of the cryptocurrency nonsense is potentially impactful. So I just, I guess it's, how is the fact that you're trying to do the XRPC and OCI a hedge bet, because they're kind of different? I'm just trying to kind of see the direction that you're going here.
Right.
That makes sense, what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah. So our main goal is to have an immutable, like I said, transaction history, and then immutable objects. Both XRPL and the OCI registry are able to provide that for us.
Okay.
So that's the main goal that we have. Now, the reason why we've added in the Rango DB, which is a graph database, is for that caching. Both of these, the OCI is a little bit better with the searching. It's not 100%. They do have search queries, but it's not going to give us, they're not going to be as flexible as we need. So that's where we're adding in the Rango DB as a caching mechanism for exactly what you said. We don't want to go through and trudge through a million transactions on the blockchain to get you your answer, because it's very linear.
Right.
So that's where the caching database would come into play. It'll allow us to get you that information fast, but at the same time have that the immutability and the transaction history that we're looking for.
Okay. I'm certainly not going to second guess your architectural decisions. It feels, putting on my VP of engineering hat, it feels like a lot of complexity is, I guess, the concern. There was another question that I had, but I will pause in case I don't want to hog all the time.
Oh.
If other folks have questions.
Anybody else have anything?
No, but I do want to say, Tara, that the discussion you're having right now is ones we've had internally.
I would imagine.
The other thing is there's a lot of data in SBOMs. It's a lot of data. And you have literally, there's millions of SBOMs to manage to try to create that historical record of change. So we've been, noodling over how to manage that kind of data for quite some time. And a ledger just made some sense around that.
And the biggest part is what we found is the ledger isn't as important as the IPFS, using IPFS to store the information. So that's one of the things that was the bigger selling point when we started looking at the ledger was, okay, we have a ledger that's going to record the transactions. But the more important part is, like Tracy is saying, how are we going to store SBOMs? Because we need a historical point of view of when an SBOM was created. So I can actually see for this component, if somebody had a vulnerability, did they fix it? And that gives us that kind of view of things. Talking to the Encore folks, they said they started storing SBOMs just for the certified Docker images from Docker Hub, and in 2 weeks they had 3 gig worth of SBOMs. So it was growing extremely fast, and they actually turned it off at that level, because what was happening is they do a build and they'd repeat everything, and they'd have one little piece that changed out of the whole picture. You change one library and you have a new SBOM at that level. And we feel with the normalization of the SBOM data, that we can kind of record just like the deltas versus recording everything every single time, and give us that perspective. We've always looked at component versions and application versions as deltas. So that's one of the things that we've always taken that viewpoint as things evolve, as we gather the data. Now on the OCI side, I'm not 100% sold on Red Hat's capabilities yet. The project is just starting off. It's not even an official project in Red Hat. I don't know if they have a Git repo yet.
But they do, but there's not much there.
Yeah. And their concept is interesting. They want to be able to have every single package manager stored into a single repository. And I think that's just a very heavy lift. You have to go and change every single package manager. There's probably at least 50 of them out there, all coming from different open source projects and viewpoints, put it that way.
Wow.
So
I mean,
Well, Red Hat has the manpower to do it if they choose to, and that we don't know if that's going to happen. And on the blockchain, we're playing with this to see how this works and looks. The open source community has learned a lot about blockchain in the process, which is kind of nice too, but it is just a proof of concept. We haven't made a decision to move forward with it for sure.
Okay.
So we are just playing with it to try to solve this particular problem. Is how do you track that kind of data and delta it
Over time at scale? Yeah.
Over time at scale. Yeah, it's a lot of data.
It is. I'm at MongoDB now, and so we're looking at our stuff and thinking, how are we going to do this? Red Hat is also well experienced, somewhat, I'll say, with fond bitterness at forking things for their own ecosystem and then not contributing back. So that's the other thing is, I haven't looked recently, but I assume that part of the cost of doing that work, they're going to not absorb because they're just going to make it work for the Red Hat ecosystem, which means then we have Red Hat and then everybody else if it goes in that direction. As far as the binaries and stuff.
Yeah, we don't know how it would look. They would like to contribute Emporius to the CNCF. We have a call with them in like 15 minutes. But what we probably would push them to do if we were going to go that way, is to make sure they were under the CDF in some way, even if it was a sub project of Ortelius, or that they brought it in as a high level project before we would move forward. So they'd have to make a commitment to make it open source before we would do something.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I will be watching this with interest.
yeah,
Yes.
it's one of those, like I said, it's for us, I've already asked them outright. If you look at this Red Hat OCI registry is going to be a direct competitor to something like SigStore. And
it is.
Yeah, in our world, we just want to point to things. We don't want to be.
We don't want to be the thing.
We don't want to be. We just want to go get things. We want to go get the SigStore information. So we want
the
to
issue that SigStore. I mean, okay, so there's the interface to the registries, and then there's who's actually putting bits on metal.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So it's the issue that, and SigStore is definitely not the full store, and I didn't think that the OCI registry was going to be either, other than for RPM packaging.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They want to make the OCI a one shop stop place, and including signatures, those type of things. And our viewpoint is more of things are out there. How can we aggregate them together?
Yeah, we don't want to dictate what development teams use or what's going to be under the pipeline. We just want to consume that data and associate it to the microservice and aggregate it up to the application. So if you're an application team, you can get, those federated views. We don't want to replace anything. We want to enhance it.
And the cost of running an OCI registry, just because of the way it's I haven't gotten into the specifics, but it looks like just a quick look at running an OCI registry in Kubernetes, and ends up just being a volume mount. And that doesn't give you the distribution like the IPFS side of things, where it's distributed across multiple machines and stuff like that. So if we're going to bring up a high availability OCI registry, it's going to cost some money. If we're going to bring up, it's going to be a couple terabytes. That's going to be several $1,000s a month just in storage at a minimum. And
which is why we like the blockchain, because it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper. It's a fraction of the cost.
Okay,
yeah.
well, that's the best use I've heard for blockchain, I think, since this thing started.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Tara, I know we're going to run out of time here soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the questions. I would love for you to digest some of this stuff and do a follow-up call with you maybe in a month to see where your head is on it. So now you see some of our challenges and what how we're trying to kind of grow that hub of data that we're tracking, and what we've already done. We'd love to be able to show you what we've already done with blockchain as well.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to learning.
Great. That would be super.
All right.
Yeah, because we are you can tell we're at a crossroads. And we need to make a decision on which direction to go. I don't know if trying to do both makes sense, but we certainly appreciate Red Hat's interest in the data that we're already storing, because it can enhance what they're doing very quickly.
Right.
So we've already done a lot of the work that they want to do. So I understand why they want us to bring our data into their Emporius backend. So that,
yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-Red Hat at all.
I know. We don't want to be only Red Hat customers either. That it's not our goal. We want it to,
And when they part of the thing is they're talking about an OCI spec change, so that has to get approved, and then once the spec gets approved, then you have to have all the OCI vendors start implementing that spec.
Right.
And I think that's going to be several years down the road.
Yeah.
We all know that open source doesn't move that fast unless somebody really lights a fire under somebody like with a security problem.
Yeah.
Well, even that, the Open SSF hasn't been able to move that fast on many things.
Right.
Alpha Omega project has gotten a ton of money put into it, and Six Store has as well. But for the most part, we move slow. So Tara, I'm going to send out a follow-up on this. And on another note, we are going to actually build a proper TOC committee since we have enough open source developers now. So we'll be doing a proper election for TOC members. And Tara, we'd love to have you stick around. So just keep that in mind.
All right. Well, we'll have to have a lot on
I
my
know.
plate.
I know you do.
We'll see. But if nothing else, we can certainly keep the conversation going.
These meetings, these TOC meetings, we try to only have them. Last year, we only had one. This year, I'd like to do two because we don't move that quickly. And when we hit those crossroads is really when we need to have a TOC review of what we're up to.
Yeah, well, and honestly, you know, like I said, it's a VP of engineering over here. I'm not probably that level of hands-on that you really want in a proper TOC moving forward. So,
Okay.
but I'm not ruling it out. Let's chat.
Okay.
Sounds like a plan.
I'll send an
Alright.
update to the TOC folks to do a follow-up call. And Tara, I'm going to shoot you an email and find out what works for you.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers all.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.